Welcome to another episode of Scales Sales Podcast. Today, really honored to have our guest, Sean from Revnue. Sean, to start with, what would be great is if you could sort of give us a general synopsis of yourself, who you are, and sort of what your company's doing.
Yeah, no worries at all. So just by way of background, I'm based in Silicon Valley. I've been in Silicon Valley for my whole life, obviously, but from a selling perspective, last 30 years. I've been in and out of a lot of different startups, some well-established publicly traded companies as well. So typically I thrive in an environment where there's big challenges, but there's obviously incredible payoffs as well. So I love standing at the plate and swinging for the fences. And that's one of the things I really love about sales is really the mentality of a salesperson is that of an entrepreneur. And so you really got to drive your mentality about going the distance and doing whatever it takes to be successful. So just by way of background, tremendous experience, a lot of different marketplaces. What I'm doing right now, thanks Ollie, is a company called Revnue. I'm the chief revenue officer here. We're in the contract lifecycle management, asset lifecycle management space. It's a new space for me to be in because my entire career has really been in networking, data centers, cloud, route switch, firewalls, all that kind of cybersecurity and things of that nature, which I think we'll get into as far as where your skills can be applied as a salesperson and, sort of skating to the puck and looking for opportunities where you can be really, really successful. So I'm sure we'll get into that a bit in our conversation today too.
Yeah, definitely. I know we originally started speaking when you were at your previous company, which was back in last December. Obviously, didn't ever have any sort of idea I'd be doing a podcast and speaking to you. And obviously, we're talking about how, and we'll delve into it later, obviously, the teams that you've grown and how well you've done in those, which definitely will be interesting for our listeners. What would be great to understand is sort of how you as the CRO have approached sort of the market positioning and differentiation sort of strategies for Revnue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that ultimately you've got to know your competition first and foremost. You need to understand how they're positioning, how they're talking to customers. And the only way that you can get that information is by talking to the same customers. So you've got to be able to reach out and develop a conversation with somebody and understand their use case, understand what their problem set is, understand what the decision criteria was for them to decide to go to a specific vendor. And then you want to look for shortcomings. You want to find out, hey, are they able to meet all of your needs? If you could add one feature or two features that they don't have today, what would that look like? That's just gold for reconnaissance and for product development on your own side to understand. You're looking for commonalities. So the more customers you talk to in that way of just sort of that open dialogue conversation, trying to learn about the space, learn about your user experience, you get enough of those points that are consistent across a number of different customers, then you begin to understand where there's deficiency in a marketplace. So that's one. The second area I think that's really, really critical that is often, quite frankly, overlooked, and it's going to sound silly to say that it's overlooked because the vast majority of the people that are listening to this podcast or that follow you and understand what you do, those sales individuals work with resellers. They work with value-added resellers. And they think about that channel as an order fulfillment channel, a way in which they can get a deal done. But there's such incredible knowledge that those sales individuals have. And that becomes a gold mine for a salesperson to tap into and to talk to those sales reps and interview those sales reps like you would a customer. Hey, what are your customers buying? What are the big projects that you're seeing that are happening? How far ahead of a deal are you engaging with a customer? That helps you with your sales cycle, right? So you don't want to have a 6-month sales cycle or an 8-month sales cycle if you don't have to. So you want to shorten that as much as you possibly can. And you'll only get that data if you look at the reseller community, the value-added reseller community, the systems integrator community. If you look at them as a resource for you to be able to gain some really great knowledge. So those are just some of the things that I look at my level and that I encourage the teams that I work with to do as well.
I think really important part that you touched on there, and it's something I've spoken about in a lot of the podcasts, is that actually just speaking to people. So a lot of people are afraid to approach other people in their industry or somebody who does something similar. And they're the people who hold the answer to maybe why you're struggling or you're not. It's like, I worked for a company before. I wasn't allowed to really speak to other recruiters because they were scared you were going to get poached or stolen. But if you just constantly look within your current sort of internal network, there is definitely someone out there maybe is doing slightly better than you. And whether this comes down to selling your product or being a leader, whatever it be, actually just having a chat with someone is so beneficial.
100% agree.
So, I mean, obviously with the space you're in, or fast-paced, ever-changing landscape, how is Revnue sort of staying proactive, adaptive to technological advancements?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about, so just by way of background, again, we touched on it a little bit when we opened the call. We're in the contract lifecycle management space and the asset lifecycle management space. And so these are industries that are pretty well established. And so you often think to yourself, well, why would you go into that space, right? If it's an industry that's pretty well established with market leading logos that are providing services in the space, why would you go into that space? And the answer is it needs to be disrupted. And when you're looking at a company, you're looking at technologies, you always want to find an area that is sort of stagnated and where can an entrepreneur come in and really disrupt that. And so that's what we're doing at Revnue. And when you think about contract lifecycle, traditionally, a lot of folks consider this to be an e-signature capacity. I've signed a contract. I've then taken that contract and I've stored it inside of Dropbox or Google Cloud, or I've dropped it into SharePoint or OneDrive or whatever. And that's where the contract would reside. And the question you have to ask yourself, just being proactive, is, well, what happens after you sign a contract, right? When do you go back and look at that contract again? And you'd be shocked to realize that most companies don't. The only time that they would go back and look at a contract is at a point in time where there's either a renewal that is coming up that they have to look at, or two, the person that they did or the company they did the contract with has identified a breach, like maybe they've missed an SLA and there's a penalty fee around it and they've got to look into that. Or three, maybe they're going through a merger and acquisition and the acquiring company is like, hey, what kind of contracts have you signed with people? Where are they at? So these are all sort of compelling business drivers that would cause a company to look at a contract. And then the nightmare begins. And so you have to kind of walk through that workflow with a customer to understand, well, what is that nightmare? And the customer will be very frank. The nightmare starts with, where the heck is the contract? Right? Where is it? And then, I'm not a lawyer. And how do I find a way to read through the contract and look for the specific terms and conditions that I'm trying to find? And a human can only read so much and retain so much. So we've obviously gone down the path of artificial intelligence and machine learning, where we can take some benefits of where the industry is today and apply that to really disrupt the way that people interact with contracts, how they can now turn a contract into a business asset and make it available across the organization. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah, definitely. While you were talking, I was just thinking about where are all my contracts stored, probably in a mix of different folders on my desktop. And we do have a document signing software. But again, when a client comes back and says, what terms did we agree to on percentage? Most of the time, I don't have a clue. And I'm having to go and find the contract, go and find out what we agreed. And obviously, when we're a startup, so invoicing clients, I don't have, like, off the top of my head, every fee that we charge every client. So yeah, it definitely is a headache. It's definitely in a cool space, and definitely something that people do need to prevent me, like myself, having meltdowns every time someone asks for my contract. What I'd love to delve into, Sean, and it's something that we obviously spoke about on our first call, which was recruitment. What I'd like to understand is just a little bit about how you approach recruitment, talent acquisition, to get the right team in place to basically drive revenue growth.
Yeah. I think this is a great subject to get into because there's a couple of different ways that you can go around recruitment. And obviously, what you guys are doing at Scale Genesis as a talent agency is really a key, having a great partner like yourself that way also. But one of the things that we have to remember is, as a leader, as an individual, even if you're an individual contributor as a salesperson on your own, you just have your own book of business and your own patch that you're trying to run through, you're always in recruitment mode. It's a constant state of being. And I say that because you're either constantly trying to recruit a customer to become a customer of yours, or recruit talent to either work with you or work for you. So you have to understand that you're always in recruitment mode. And if that's true, it changes the way that you show up, right? It changes the way that you interact with people. It changes the way that you operate in the world. And because you're always on. And so you never know when you're at a sports event, or you're out having a beer with some buddies, or out on the golf course, or whatever it is that you're doing, you never know who's around you. And so I'll never forget the true story, very, very funny story. I was on an airplane ride coming back from a big sales conference, a trade show that was happening in Las Vegas. And this is very, very early on. I want to say this was probably like 2004-ish, maybe 2005-ish. And there was an absolutely insane startup company that was very, very early on in cloud. And I knew who the founder of this company was. And I was really trying desperately to get hired into this company. That cloud sales didn't exist back then. It was a new industry, things of that nature. But I was on an airplane and I was talking to the person next to me about the conference that we had just gone to. And I was probing this individual about, like, what were you there to find out? What were you trying to see? What were your key takeaways of the conference? And how would you be able to apply that to your business today? And just like this open dialogue. And, we're sitting on an aisle of an airplane, and across the aisle, I knew who this individual was. Obviously, they didn't know who I was, but it was the founder and CEO of that software company that I'm talking about. And he sort of leaned forward and looked over to where we were sitting. He's like, "Hey, you must be in sales." I said, "Yeah, you must be so-and-so." And he's like, "Oh, wow, you know who I am?" I said, "Yeah, I actually interviewed for your company, and your VP of sales said that I didn't have the background that he wanted." And, remember, cloud didn't exist back then. And so this type of cloud sales, obviously data centers and cloud existed, but this type of a cloud solution was the first of its kind. And it's just a very funny story, because we ended up having a great dialogue after the plane landed and we were walking to our cars and stuff like that. And so he and I have maintained a really strong friendship over the years. But you just never know who's going to be listening to your conversation and who's going to say, "Wait, you just piqued my interest, man, because you got something going on." I think that we all operate in a way, if we think that we're always in a recruitment mode, then recruitment becomes easy. And when you chase a cat, it runs away from you. But when you sit on the sofa, the cat comes up and lays in your lap, right? So you've got to be able to get to a point where you're just operating in a way where people are interested in what you're doing or interested in what you're saying, and they want to be participating in that conversation. And recruitment becomes an easy task.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. And actually, your story's pretty well fitted in the sense of, at the weekend, I went to one of my friend's birthday barbecues. Never met her dad or anything like that. And we're a few beers deep at this point. And he then, I go, "Oh, what do you do for work?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm a director of sales." At this point, my eyes light up and I go, "Okay, cool. I can talk to you." And then I was like, "Okay." So I started asking questions and sort of trying to be a little bit coy about it. And just going, "Oh, what do you do for work? Like, what sort of companies, what sort of software are you selling?" He was like, "Oh, telecommunications in London, blah, 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 blah." And then my girlfriend sees me and she goes, "Ollie, if you are pitching him right now, I'm going to hit you." And I was like, "Well, no, it's fine. I'm not pitching him." He turns around and goes, "Yeah, you are." I was like, I shot myself in the foot here. I'd all the way through just been going like, no, I'm not going to pitch him or anything. But he was actually a really good sport about it and was like, "Actually, Ollie, you actually showed good skills in a sense of that you saw the hook, you saw what I did, and you couldn't help but see an opportunity for business." It was funny because he also gave me some constructive criticism and we'd had a few beers. So I was like, "I don't agree with you." It was good fun. But yeah, you never know who you're around. I'd been there for like 6 or 7 hours at this point. So I had no clue, even though I've been sitting at the table talking about sales and talking about my strategies and stuff like that, because everybody there did recruitment pretty much. And it just turned out his dad did tech sales. So I was like, so he's probably been there judging me all afternoon going, "Oh, this guy doesn't even know what he's talking about." This guy had like 40 years of sales experience. So I was like,
It's just one of the things that I could kind of give you a tip. And this might be something that the listeners of this might be able to benefit from. I call it the third party invitation. And so what this is if you're talking to an individual like that, and there's a way that you can pitch them by pitching around them. And so it's just a good technique that you can use is to say, what the industry that you're in, and here's how you help businesses, and here's how you help individuals doing what they're doing. And, it's a new business. It's scaling out really quickly. We're staffing up. I'd love to get some referrals from you of companies that might be able to benefit from a technology of ours. So you're not pitching him, you're going around him. And then he's like, "Well, wait a minute. Hey, whoa, why not me?"
Yeah, to make them come to you rather than going to them. And what he said to me, and the advice was he was like, "Ollie, at no point did you ask me, what do I think of recruitment?" So I didn't actually even get his opinion of like recruitment. Don't get me wrong, mid-conversation, he was telling me all about what his growth for his team is and how he goes about recruitment. But if I'd started the conversation with finding out what his thoughts are on it, it would have gone a whole different path rather than I actually did what you were saying in a sense of I tried to sell around by saying, "Look, well, we've done this with this sort of company and everything like that." But I kept on bringing it back to his company, which obviously if I'd gone your way, I would have been fine. I would have gone around it. But I was going straight for the jugular. I'd had a couple of beers. I was like, "I'm going to close this." But yeah, it was good fun.
I would say it's not uncommon, right? Because in
Mm,
sales, we're, just personality wise, we're all type A. We all are, wanting to go for, like you said, the jugular. We want to go tear down the deal every time we see something
yeah.
that looks like a deal. And I think it's good coaching as far as being patient and, sitting back a little bit and allow the opportunity to come to you in as much as you want to go pursue it. Because we all have our go-to-market initiatives that we're doing, our outbound communication, our outbound cold call, phone calling and cold call emailing, and all the automation that we try to do with salespeople. But when we're talking to people as humans, it is different because we now need to relate. And so you got to find a way to relate. And how did you get, all the same things? Wow, you're running a large organization in sales. How'd you get into the business? And there's a saying that I heard a long time ago about, it's better to be interested than interesting. And so when you're talking to a customer, when salespeople, we always want to go in with the features and the benefits of what we're doing. We always want to go in like, I've got these 12 customers and here's how I'm solving all their problems and all this kind of stuff. And so it's about you. And it's not about the customer. And so if we just close our mouth a little bit and start asking the questions about, tell me about this for you, or what do and you're interviewing them and you're interested in what they're doing, and you've got to get out of the sort of salesperson customer relationship. You got to get into personalization, right? Which is, how was the weekend? What did you do? And what do you do for hobbies and things of that nature? Because now you're interested in them as a person. And so that's how you develop rapport quickly. And those are all little tips and tricks that can be helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can't lie. As soon as I see someone that mentions golf on their LinkedIn, I'm like, right, I'm going to jump straight on this bandwagon. I could talk about that all day. So it's definitely, if anyone's out there and they want to have a great chat, please put what hobbies you do on LinkedIn. But no, you are right. Just being able to ask those questions and sort of get the information you need to build a rapport very early. And I'm a big believer that rapport can get you very far with a lot of clients. Sometimes it can outweigh even your knowledge. You just get, it's a very big debate. And I was having it with someone the other day in the sense of, I'm a big believer that people buy from people. So people will buy into you, especially in recruitment. Of this, I don't want to work with someone I don't like, preferably, because if they're rude to me and they're not working the way that I want to work, they're not listening to me, or as you said, not showing an interest in me, I don't know why I would buy from them. Even if their service is absolutely amazing, if I can avoid them and there's something else that's just as good, I would prefer to work with them. But it's a big debate I was having with someone the other day on LinkedIn, and their point of view was completely opposite to mine. Didn't think it would come across that way, but it's definitely a topic. But yeah, we don't need to delve into it too much. But obviously, finding the people is hard enough. But obviously, in the current market for the past few years, actually retaining the staff is just as hard. How have you, as a CRO, VP of sales, how do you go about making sure that you're keeping your staff?
Well, I think it comes into development, right? I think it comes into mentorship and coaching. And if the reality is, especially if you look at the market today, most sellers, they have about a 2-year shelf life before they're going to want to transition out and go to another area. And so, you have to embrace that. You have to understand that you're going to be in a situation as a leader where you're going to be developing people, and you have to embrace the fact that they may end up leaving and moving on to something else. And you can't take that stuff personally, right? And I think that there are situations where some leaders do take it personally. They feel like, you left me, you're a top performer and you left me. And I think that if you come at it as the responsibility is obviously to drive a number, you got to hit the number of what the company's out to accomplish, but you always are trying to get people to up-level those skills, and they're going to come into you and come into the opportunity that you have given them at a certain skill level. And as a leader, you've got to find out where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are, and see if you can help develop those weaknesses and make those strengths even stronger, and get them to overachieve and get them to be the best version of themselves of what they can do. Now, in that process, you're going to have people that can't develop themselves, right? And so that's going to be a situation where you have to liberate them back to the workforce, right? Because they don't have the ability to sort of scale and learn the skills that need them to advance their careers, because you're always trying to up-level the talent around on the team. So those individuals that can, those that do develop, you've got compensation plans that are written in a way that top performers can continue to achieve the financial rewards and the recognition that they're looking to accomplish. And then over time, they may get to a situation where it's an opportunity for them to move elsewhere. It could be that, you're at a publicly traded company and the employee stock purchase program is what it is, but you've got an individual that's younger in their career and they want to go to that IPO, they want to go to that startup company, which has a lot of risk, but they're early enough in their career that they want to take that risk and they want to leave to go do that endeavor. Or it could be a leadership position. Maybe it's an individual contributor that's been gone from a territory salesperson to a major account salesperson to a global account salesperson. And they sort of feel like they've understood the different motions and now they want to go into leadership. But unfortunately, at your current employer, there's not a leadership position that's available for them to go pursue. So then they would leave to go take a leadership position elsewhere. You can't fault anybody for wanting to develop themselves, right? So I think that if you create a culture of growth, if you create a culture of learning, a culture of mentoring, people will want to remain with you. They'll want to grow and develop with you and enhance their careers. But I think you've got to understand that not always will they stay with you for their entire career.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a super important thing to touch on, especially in the tech sales space or even in recruitment, that you will have a lot of people that are searching that financial gain all the time. That we speak to a lot of candidates on a daily basis as recruiters that are just, they will go, look, I'm passively looking, but if you can get me a 15% increase on what I'm currently doing, I'll consider it. And the amount of times we get that message, or I at least need 20% or whatever it be. And in a lot of cases, a lot of companies do just pay them the market averages, and it's how well you perform. They're the conversations I like to have. As soon as it's like, I don't care about the OT, I'm just going to go and absolutely crush it no matter what. I'm like, great, I've got a great candidate here who's going to interview well. He's definitely going to say the right answers to the client. Whereas if someone's just always talking about, are you going to get me more money on my base or more money on my OT? I'm like, yeah, probably can do, but it's down to you to hit your quota. And there are a lot of people that we spoke to on the podcast have said, actually, when they're interviewing, they sort of, the first question they actually say to what the individual is, ask me a question. And at that point, if the interviewer is just turning around or interviewee, is turning around and going, oh, well, what's the OT for the role? I mean, I had one manager say that he just ends a call there. He doesn't even say goodbye, which I don't condone. I wouldn't do myself, but I mean, fair enough. He knows what he likes and what he doesn't. But yeah, it's definitely not the right way to approach things. And you would think that salespeople would have a better understanding of interviewing. Cool. So obviously as a CRO, VP of sales, I mean, how do you go about identifying and nurturing emerging leaders within your company?
Yeah, I think that the short answer is success leaves clues, right? And what I mean by that is you'll see people when you're looking at a staff of, I've had staffs of 35, 50 people in different companies, being a regional leader. I've had staffs larger than that, smaller than that, depending on where you're at. I think that when you look at the aggregate, when you look at the entire team overall, success leaves clues. So you're intuitively going to see people that are going to show up as leaders. They're the ones that are early to your meetings. They're the ones that are diligent about their forecasting. They're the ones that are diligent about follow-up. The company has training curriculum. The employees need to participate. These people are the ones that do it first, right? So success leaves clues. And those individuals you can kind of hone in on and develop them in a different track or a different way. But as a leader, it's important to understand that you're getting people at different levels of their career. So you're going to be having people that are in their early side of their career. You're going to have people mid-career, people towards the tail end of their career. So you have to be able to coach at the level of where those individuals are at. But I think that, your question was, how do I identify those talent? That's the secret recipe, right? And then those individuals that aren't consistent, the ones that are always late to a meeting, or they show up at a meeting with a coffee, which means that they went to a coffee shop to get a coffee before they came to the meeting. So they had time to do that, but they didn't have time to get to the meeting on time, right? So those are all coachable moments, right? Where you have the opportunity to not in a public way, but in a private way, pull them aside and say, hey, listen, you were tardy today for the meeting. I want you to understand how it looks when you show up, how it looks when you come in with a coffee from the coffee shop and everybody else is here on time, which it telegraphs to the team that you had time to go do that activity, but not to be respectful of everybody else to be here on time. And it's interesting because situational awareness is important. And sometimes individuals aren't really clear about how they show up. They've never had somebody pull them aside and give them that one-on-one coaching about be aware of how you appear with other folks. So the answer to your question is success leaves clues. You have the ability to see the people that are showing up in that professional way. And then you also have the ability to see people that aren't. And then you look to see if they're coachable. Are they going to be early next time? Are they going to be allocating time next time? And so that's all helpful stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Do you know what? I love that, because I was thinking back of all the people that have turned up to coffees, and we recently have had this conversation when we're planning our day, and we use time blocking to do everything. Of that, whenever there's something like a podcast filming, and I've got a half an hour break before it, it's like, oh, what should I do in this half an hour? And you'll be twiddling your thumbs, or we call it busy work. So we've tried to actually reduce our days so we don't have so much busy work. And it is one of those things, I'll just go and grab a coffee, which then takes half an hour. Then you start your meeting. Then after it, you're like, oh, I better finish my coffee. So then that meeting that was maybe an hour has just become an hour and 45 of your day. It is funny. And when I'm thinking of all those people that I've seen do that. And I have been guilty myself. Normally mine for being late is I'm being selfish as hell. And I'm like, I'm really busy, I'm going to keep going, or whatever it is. But no, it's definitely a good point, and definitely good to highlight. What I'd love to sort of delve into now is a little bit more about sort of your journey in leadership. So are there any key lessons you've learned about driving revenue growth? Or, I mean, obviously we talked about sort of building successful teams, but more about the revenue growth.
Yeah, I think that growth, it's all about the different avenues that you have at your disposal to drive the number up, right? So as a sales leader, you have a lot of different things that are at your disposal, right? You've got your marketing organization, your go-to-market team, your sales development team, your business development team. You have all these different resources that are available to you. And so you're trying to look at all those different levers of what you can do and how you can get each of those levers to increase performance at their respective area. And then the collective whole drives the number up over time. And so I think that when you're trying to scale it out, it's important to do a self-analysis of the business overall, right? Where are you excelling? And what are those individuals or those teams doing that are excelling? And are there learned lessons that can be applied to other teams or other individuals to help them become just as successful? That's key. And then where are you not successful? And where you're not being successful, are there examples in the industry of others that are being successful? And then what can you learn from what other people are doing? Because you're trying to get all these different levers to perform to the best of their ability. And that ultimately takes care of the number, it drives the number. And I always say to folks, momentum cures all problems. And so when you're in momentum, salespeople don't have a time to complain about the comp plan or complain about a bug in a platform or complain about a customer support situation their customers got involved in, which is very, very important, all important stuff. But when you're in momentum, you're constantly going. You have to rely on other people to be able to do the roles that they're responsible for doing. And I think that sometimes that can be a distraction for leaders and a distraction for individual contributors is, this is what we're chartered to do. And we have to trust and we have to know that we've got team members in other areas that are responsible for that function. And that's not your function to solve. And so we've just got to be in a sales leadership position. You're a master delegator. You've got to delegate a bunch of stuff and float in and coach and develop where you need to coach and develop and to drive the number. And because you've got a board that you're responsible for, a management team that you're responsible for. And then you also have the development of the sales teams that you're responsible to manage and to maintain. So you're selling up and you're selling down, right? Inside of an organization. And as an individual contributor, you're doing the same thing, right? Where you're selling out through your channels, your reseller community, you're selling up to your boss, whoever your regional director, regional vice president would be. So you're selling up and you're selling out the same way. These are just scaling issues, right? So it's ultimately the same skills. It's just at a different level of purview. Your aperture is just wider open as a VP of sales than it is as an individual contributor because you're only looking at your territory, but the principles are the same.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think there's some really good points there. And I mean, is there anything along your extensive journey so far that has sort of helped shape your leadership style?
I think there's two things. One is your own personal development. You've got to make the investment in yourself. You have to become the best version of yourself. So there are personal development seminars you can go through. There's books on personal development that you can read through. There's things like that. So, you can make a fortune if you develop yourself, right? Because you're going to end up just separating yourself from the crowd to a certain extent because you operate at different levels. So I would say personal development is absolutely key. And then number two, and this is really, really important, is you can be a person of influence without a title. And if you come to business to be a person of influence, to influence your customers, to influence your reseller community, to influence your team members, to influence management, if you can become really strong as a positive source of influence, your career will take care of itself. You're not going to have to worry about anything. And I think that it's a common mistake that some people place, is that once I become a manager, once I get a title, I will have influence, or I will have the ability to manage the direction. It's not true. You can't be an influencer with a title. You can only be an influencer by being an influencer. and that's key. So you have to learn the power of influence. And if you can do personal development and learn the power of influence, that'll take care of you being an individual contributor, smashing your quota and smashing your number every year and being a top performer and recognizing that capacity. You'll also be identified by your current employer as, this is an individual that we need to emulate. We need to get more people like this person. We need to take this person and offer them growth opportunities within the organization, management opportunities, leadership opportunities, things like that. It all takes care of itself.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's super important. And I mean, when I started my career in recruitment, when I walked into my office and it was my first day, I sat down and went, right, who's the best person here? Who's going to have the greatest influence on me? And he was stood in the corner by the window. He was the highest biller, like making the most amount of money, had designer suits on. And I was like, I want to be just like him. Yes, he won't mind me saying he's one of my great mates. Had a lot of arrogance, a lot of confidence about him. I listened, I tapped into every call that he was making, listening to what he was saying, trying to mimic it, learn it. And that's actually the quickest way of learning. Just find someone, or self-development, whether it's actually picking up a book or watching a YouTube video, or just here, like learning from the person next to you. Super important. And yeah, I'm glad you touched on that, because that's been the biggest impact on my career, working in an office every day prior to my new role. I learned mainly from my peers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely a key one. Obviously, being a leader isn't all roses and flowers. Are there any challenges that you faced and sort of how you overcame them?
Well, I think that in a high growth environment where you're needing to staff up and you're needing to hire people, you can make mistakes. You can hire individuals that may not be perfectly suited for the role that they were brought into. So you have to be able to acknowledge those shortcomings and find a way to either manage them up or manage out. So I think it's really important to understand, even in a high growth, high velocity hiring process, that you have systems in place, you have structure in place, additional resources that can help with the interviewing process, whatever is required. But it's important to have that sort of 30, 60, 90-day probationary period where you're working with somebody to get them ramped up and onboarded, and just to see how well they do. And are they able to really dive in and be successful? So challenges for me would be having somebody that was hired into a role that was miscast. They're not wrong, bad, and horrible as individuals. They're just miscast. They're just in the wrong role. And so seeing that and identifying that and being able to act quickly earlier in my career and at different points in my career, I feel like I hadn't been able to act as quickly as I probably should have, as a detriment to myself and a detriment to that individual as well. So I think that that's an area of some challenges. Other areas I think that would happen is if, the big one that happens for salespeople is missing a number, right? We do everything that we can to validate and to qualify an opportunity. And there's a funny acronym that is in the industry, ABC, always be closing. And I always say, no, it's always be clarifying. Right? Because you always got to be qualifying, which is a Q. So I use clarifying as the C, ABC. But you've got to constantly qualify the opportunity. Even if you've gone through your demo, you've gone through your proof of concept stage, you've gone through negotiated pricing, you've gone through, we're ready to move forward. You constantly have to be qualifying that opportunity. Is this still on track to close? Is this still a stakeholder still involved? Are they still supportive of this? And you can have all that stuff done, and then a pandemic hits, or then, any number of things can happen and your deal may still go sideways. And so if your deal does go sideways, but it's important to telegraph that quickly, notify your manager, and it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation, but it happens. And so I think that it's important for salespeople, either as an individual contributor or as a leader, to understand, because everybody's going to feel bad and you're going to feel horrible about missing a number or missing a forecast or something like that. So it's important to acknowledge your manager and your manager's manager know you're upset. They know you feel bad. They know that you are just wearing your emotions on your sleeve, right? So they get that. So you don't have to go to them and say, I'm sorry, I messed up, or this happened or that happened. You need to go to them with the answer. You need to go to them with the solution that says, hey, here's my vetting process. Here's what I went through. Here's the torpedo that I got. I didn't see this torpedo coming. It was unrelated to our sales campaign. Here's the 10 decision makers. They're still the same 10 decision makers. They still want to move forward. They've just delayed this project from this point to that point, and gone after it. And so, it's not dead. We're still pursuing it. Or if it is dead because they went to a different provider, it is dead and went to a different provider. But I think when you approach very openly about what you did to get that deal qualified and why you were forecasting it per se, and then when it did go sideways, why it went sideways, what you could do differently in the future so it doesn't happen to you again. So it becomes a learning opportunity that you're demonstrating to your leadership that you learn from this process. And this is the sort of scaffolding that you'll put around yourself to make sure that doesn't happen in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I think actually that was one of the hardest things that I struggled with when I first started, was the deal falling through, me throwing my toys out of the pram because I was having a hissy fit. But then actually when someone goes to me like, did you qualify them right? Or what did you do wrong in this situation? What could you have done better? And I think to me, I was like, well, I covered everything. I did this. I did everything you've told me to do. But actually, as I matured and got as a better salesperson, I sat there and went, actually, no, but I could have done this bit, or I could have asked this one more question, or the high risk questions, as I call them. If I'd asked it and maybe not got the answer that I wanted to hear, I would have actually highlighted the red flag and gone, actually, I'm wasting my time here. Let's move on to a different opportunity, or let my manager know that maybe we need to do something a bit special here, reduce our fee. Or there was too many times where maybe I was too expensive because I didn't want to ask that question. Is there another agency involved who are actually cheaper, and they end up going with their candidate? But lessons learned, and it is a key point to touch on. Looking at the final two questions of the podcast is the last, second to last. If you could just sort of give us an insight into, it's one of the hardest topics in sales is work-life balance. If you could sort of give us an understanding of your journey with that and any advice you have.
Yeah, I think that you've got to create the space to have that balance. And when you are in a personal setting, it's important to be present in that personal setting so that you're not distracted to a certain extent. So just by way of my own process, I'm up at 4:45, a little bit before 5 o'clock every single morning. I'm up early, got to do strength training. I've got to do exercise. I got to get out in the elements. So I'll exercise for 45 minutes, right? First thing in the morning. I'll take my dog on a 3-mile walk. I'll listen to an audiobook. Atomic Habits is one of the books. I'm just going through audiobook right now. It's like my 5th time going through it as well. But just find a great audiobook. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in sales. Like the last audiobook that I finished was Jay Shetty's Think Like a Monk. And it's just a great mindset book. And so, you can find audiobooks and just create that space. So it takes me about 45 minutes to walk my dog. And then I'm back home at the house by 6:15, 6:30 in the morning. It's still early enough to have a coffee and then be present with my family as my kids are getting up to get ready for school. It's summer break here in the States, but as the kids are getting up and getting ready for their school day, I can be present with them. I've had my personal time. I can have, time with the family. They can get off to school and I'm off to work and able to be, dedicated that way. And I think that, work-life balance is creating that for yourself. Now, your question was, how was it and how was your journey to get there? I was not a 4:45 wake up person ever in my life, right? ever. And I had a leader said, well, then change that. Like, but I can't get up that early. We'll change that. It's too early for me to get up. We'll change that. And so you've got to just understand that you can train your body to do what you need your body to do. And I think that, if you're not spending that time to create that balance, then that's when you can get into health issues. You can get into some stress issues that drive you in a different way. And so it's just important to be focused that way. And then, when you're if you're not married, you have a significant partner, a significant other. And, when you're with that person, to be present with that person. If you do have a family, be present with your kids and be present with your family when you're together. Cell phones down at dinner time. Right. That kind of thing.
Simple, but so effective and so important.
Simple, but so effective. Yep, exactly.
Definitely. No, some really good points touched on there. I'm a big gym advocate. My last previous company, I struggled really bad with panic attacks, anxiety from overworking. I wasn't going to the gym. I wasn't playing cricket. I wasn't doing the things I love. I was just like work. And suddenly I was like, I was at work going, my chest hurts and just feeling like rubbish. And I then change companies and I get my balance back and my hours are a little bit better and I have more control of my life. And so, lo and behold, I haven't had one panic attack or have any pains in my chest or anything. And it was all just from focusing on actually going, my billings haven't taken any impact, or I haven't done less deals because I've taken more time for myself. There is an extent, you can't just be taking every day off, but like just actually having a little bit more self-care is super important. And when you're starting out in sales, you sort of like, I want to do everything as fast as I can. And yeah, it's a good lesson learned. For the final question of the podcast, not something I gave you or you would have seen, but if 25-year-old Sean could ask Sean a question now, what would you ask yourself?
The question I would probably ask is, how can I accelerate my career to be where you are quicker, right? It took you X number of years to get where you're at. How can I truncate that? How can I get there faster? How can I do something more quickly? I think that's the number one question that I would probably have asked myself. And there's no real shortcut. Everybody's journey is going to be everybody's journey. You're going to see people that are going to become sales leaders younger in their career, earlier in their career, younger in age. It just is, what is your respective journey? So my response to the 25-year-old version of myself would be, get involved in personal development sooner. Become a person of influence sooner, because those two criteria can accelerate your career crazy. Even if you don't become a leader until later in your career, your success on smashing quota will just happen consistently, and it'll open yourself up. And then I would say the second thing is, when you start to get those big commission checks, buy a rental house, don't buy a car.
Yeah, I did it the other way around and bought a car straight away. But we should have had this conversation a little bit sooner, I think. But
yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah, we can't help it. And I expect fourth would be wake up at 4:45.
Yeah, exactly. Don't stay out too late drinking.
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely needing to. My hours are a little bit weird. I mean, as you know, I do the US hours, so waking up in the morning, so 9 o'clock is early for me. But then I go to bed late, so it's fine. But
yeah, it's fine. Just your workday is your workday, and I think the answer is, if you can start 2 or 3 hours before your workday begins, and that's what your early morning is, to give you that time to balance it. It's always important, because it sets your mind in a different state. You've got the endorphins kicked in, you're awake, you're alert, you've thought through the day. There's other tips and tricks that you can do about, sorting your day, about what are the most critical things to do and what's the noise and how to avoid the noise. You can probably do a whole podcast on, a daily method of operation to make yourself be more successful and more productive.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think that, it's a good point you bring in, because whatever your work schedule is like, the answer is just preface that day by a couple hours, 2 or 3, to give you the time to work out, exercise, get your mind right, and then get going.
Yeah, definitely. No, I completely agree. That is everything, Sean. And I really appreciate your time and being honest with your answers. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And really appreciate you giving us time.
You bet. Have a great day. All right, Ollie.
You too. Cheers, Sean.
Cheers.